Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep on how stuff of the environment, like water, salt, light,
Hmm.
non-living stuff, really impacts how plants grow.
Yeah,
But not just grow, like physically grow, but
yeah,
also how it like changes their internal chemistry.
right.
We're talking about how they make these specialized compounds, secondary metabolite. These
Exactly.
things are like the molecules behind a lot of plant flavors,
Hmm.
fragrances, even medicines.
Absolutely. And you know what's fascinating to me is how these really basic environmental conditions can trigger these like massive shifts in plant biochemistry.
It is pretty wild.
And we're not talking about just like passive reactions.
Yeah,
This is active survival going on here, how they deal with like everything from drought to super intense sunlight.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so let's start with drought. I think something that a lot of people are familiar with, that when water's scarce, what's actually happening inside the plant?
Yeah. Well, they're dealing with a lot of stress. One is osmotic stress, so you can think of their cells as like struggling to maintain water balance.
Right.
And then there's oxidative stress, which is like the cellular damage. And so to combat this, a lot of plants will increase their production of compounds called phenolics.
Okay.
And these act like protectors, helping to maintain cell integrity and even like neutralize damaging free radicals. It's like buying the plant time until it rains again.
So they're like retooling themselves chemically to handle dryness.
Exactly.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So what about too much salt, like in coastal areas?
Yeah, so high salt, it causes osmotic stress too, but then there's this added ionic stress from all the extra salt.
Right.
And so plants in these areas often produce compatible solutes.
Hmm.
These are like molecules that help balance the pressure inside and outside their cells.
Okay.
And they also start tweaking their secondary metabolism, to deal with the stress at like a molecular level.
Wow. So it's a tailored response to this very specific harsh condition.
It is.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, think about temperature plants. Always seem so vulnerable to like extreme heat and cold. So how do they manage that?
Well, with extreme heat, it can trigger the production of these things called heat shock proteins, and these help to keep the cellular machinery functioning, you know?
How interesting.
And then when it's cold, they might produce cryoprotectants, which are like natural antifreeze.
Oh, wow.
And both of those temperature extremes, can also change like the types and amounts of secondary metabolites that are being made.
So it's like they have a built-in thermostat and an emergency crew all at the same time.
Right.
That's amazing.
Okay.
What about light? I always think about like too much sun can't be a good thing, right?
Yeah, you're right. Intense light, especially UV radiation, it can cause something called photooxidative stress.
Okay.
And this is where those, vibrant colors that we see in plants often come in.
Oh.
So they'll increase their production of antioxidant pigments like carotenoids and anthocyanins. Think of like the deep red color of a beet. And they also create UV screening compounds like flavonoids. It's like their own personal sunscreen.
So those bright colors are actually a sign of protection.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay. So we've talked about like challenges. What about nutrients? How does what a plant eats affect all of this?
Well, nutrient availability is really foundational. I mean, essential nutrients, they fuel basic growth. That's what we call primary metabolism.
Yeah.
But they also provide the raw materials and the energy for making those secondary metabolites, so good nutrition, it underpins both growth and defense.
It's not just about quantity though, right? It's about the balance.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if there's a nutrient deficiency, like, not enough nitrogen or phosphate, the plant will actually shift its focus from growth to defense.
Interesting.
And that means more secondary metabolites.
Okay.
And what's kind of crazy is that sometimes having too much of a nutrient can actually suppress secondary metabolism because the plant just goes into overdrive with growth,
Wow. So it's all about balance.
It is, yeah, the carbon to nutrient ratio is super important here.
Okay.
That's basically the balance of energy sources to building blocks.
Okay. So to recap, it sounds like plants are constantly sensing and reacting to their surroundings. All the non-living stuff, drought, salt, temperature, light, even heavy metals.
Yeah.
And they're adjusting their internal chemistry to cope, especially those secondary metabolites.
That's a great summary.
And the availability and balance of nutrients plays a huge role in deciding, does the plant focus on growing bigger or defending itself?
Yeah, and if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, understanding these complex interactions, it has like huge practical applications, especially when we think about agriculture and biotechnology.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine being able to precisely control the production of valuable medicinal compounds just by like carefully managing the environment that the plants grow in.
That's a really cool thought. So the next time you see a plant, thriving in what looks like a really tough spot, remember all those incredible chemical adjustments that are happening inside, driven by all these abiotic factors? I mean, what other unseen chemical responses are happening out there in the plant world that we haven't even discovered yet?
It makes you wonder.
It really does. Well, thanks for joining me for this deep dive. It was really interesting.
My pleasure.
And we'll catch you next time.
See ya. Bye.